So let's have a look at this article here. So in 1955, Maurice Duverger published The Political Role of Women, the first behavioralist multinational comparison of women's electoral participation, etc., etc. So what you want to do with something like this is just read this really quickly. So electoral participation, ever to use selection data and survey data together. His study analyzed women's patterns of voting, political candidacy, political activism. Duverger's research findings were that women voted somewhat less frequently, etc. So what you're doing, like, look, this is basically just introduction, okay? So you can say that's intro. Then we've got the research findings here, and that's the specific finding. Duverger's work set an early standard for the sensitive analysis of women's electoral activities. He placed his findings in the context of historical processes, but the context have changed over time, so this is an interesting change. So his approach has proved more durable than his actual findings. That's an important point. So basically, what we're looking at is this is Duverger's work and then into the future. And then, okay, so he failed to consider specific factors, etc. Okay, and then given the failure, the study foreshadowed the enduring limitations of the behavioralist approach. Okay, so, and then this is limitations. So basically that's all you need to do when you read one of these things, is you want to go through it. You do want to read it, possibly twice even. Just give it a quick skim, 10 seconds, and then go through and read it as more of a proper skim read. Shouldn't take more than 30 seconds to a minute to read something like that. And if it's going to take longer than that, then you're just reading too carefully, and you just don't actually want to be reading carefully. That's kind of the point of reading comprehension. You need to be able to read it quickly and get the idea of it. And if you try to read it too fast or too in depth, basically, you're going to just sink into the details and not get anywhere, which is one of the big problems that people have with reading comprehension. So look, let's go to the questions. The primary purpose of the passage is okay, so normally what I do here is I just look at the verbs first, evaluate, fine, maybe, summarize the history. There's no history of a research area in here. Report new research findings. It's not new findings, 1955. Reinterpret old research findings. Is it reinterpreting? No, there's nothing about reinterpreting. Reconcile conflicting. What are those conflicting findings and how are we reconciling them? No, it's evaluate. So we're talking about Duverger's study and then evaluating what it was about and then what it did after 1955. Now, according to the passage, Duverger's study was unique in 1955, so unique, one and only, okay, in that it, let's see, well, where do they talk about it? He published the first behaviorist multinational comparison of women's electoral participation ever to use election data and survey data together. So this is a fact question, right? So almost certainly that's your answer. Included both election data and survey data, gathered from sources never before used in political studies. There's nothing to indicate that. Included an analysis of historical processes. Where does it even talk about historical processes? Oh, here's historical processes. If places findings in the context of historical processes, that's not an analysis. Examine the influence on voting behavior of the relationships between men and women. It doesn't really talk about that either. So what we're doing is, it's the differences between men and women, but it's not the relationships between men and women, except for this part here, the ramifications of political and social relations. But it's vaguely mentioned in one part. It's not anything about why it was unique in 1955. So I would ignore that part. Then analyze not only voting and political candidacy, but other political activities. It's not even clear what the other political activities are. So no, it's definitely included both election data and survey data together. It's stated right there. Which of the following characteristics of a country is most clearly an example of a factor that Duverger failed to consider? So look for failed to consider in the passage, right? So somewhere, where did it go? Failure to consider, there you go. Failure to consider certain specific factors. So our factors are 1, influence of political regimes, 2, the effects of economic factors, and 3, the ramifications of political and social relations between women and men. So which of these answer choices would match one of those? So a large population is not political regime, economic factor, or social relations between women and men. So no. Protestant population is none of those things. Urban population is none of those things. A one-party government is a political regime, probably your answer. Location in the heart of Europe, there's nothing about that in these. So it's, yeah, the only one you could stretch even to make it work is D. So let's go to the next questions. I'm just going to switch this over. All right. It's going to get harder to read from here, but let's take a look here. So, okay, so the author implies that Duverger's actual findings. So look, again, actual findings, that's a trigger word. So actual findings right here. Okay, his approach was more durable than his actual findings. What does that mean? That means that the way that he did his analysis actually outlasted the findings themselves, so the data that he got. So the way to analyze is okay, but the data is something that's going to change over time, right? So what we're talking about, the context has changed over time, the approach has proved more durable than the findings. So the idea there would be, okay, it's about the findings in 1955 were accurate in 1955, but maybe aren't now. So limited by the countries, no. Inaccurate of the description of the countries, no. Out of date in that they're inapplicable in the 4 countries today, that looks pretty good. Flawed because they're based on unsound data. There's nothing about the data being sound or unsound. And also something that's vaguely insulting like this is probably not going to be your answer in the first place, just because it's insulting. And biased by Duverger's political beliefs. We have no reason to believe that. So the approach has proved more durable than the actual findings. That fits that they're out of date now. The passage implies Duverger found the voting rates were most different in a country where, okay, so look, anytime you have a parenthetical statement, you're going to have a question about it. Otherwise, they wouldn't bother with the parenthetical. So you have that right there. The difference narrows the longer the women had the vote. So if the women and men were quite separate to begin with, then the difference narrows, it gets smaller the longer women have the vote. So the voting rates were most different when the countries first allowed women to vote, right? So the answer that says that is he had possessed the right to vote for the shortest time. And then this one, the author implies that some behavioralist research involving the multinational study of women's political participation that followed Duverger's study did which of the following? Okay, well here, foreshadowed the enduring limitations. So look at that. There's a word nobody knows. Foreshadowed. Don't even worry about it. The enduring limitations, that's the key. So enduring over time, right? Something that's true over time. And the foreshadowed, it just means predicted, essentially, in a context like this. You don't need to know what it means to answer this question because enduring tells you everything. So they're trying to mess with you by giving you a verb that is very specific that few people know, but you can get the context, or you can understand what it means by looking at the word enduring. So don't stress over that. Usually they'll do something like that. There's a way to cheat this even if you don't know what that verb means. Don't freak out. So basically what it's saying, over time, the further studies had similar limitations. That's the point here, okay? So which one talks about that? Ignoring Duverger's approach? No, they took his approach. Suffered from faults similar? Probably this one. Focus on political activism? No. Focus on the influences of political regimes? No. Focus on the political and social relations between women and men? No. I mean, that's just talking about these things. They're going through them one by one. No, the foreshadowed the enduring limitations. That is definitely suffering from similar faults.